Hey everyone, it's been a while. I've got this Stihl BR-600 4MX engine here. It's acting like it's seized out. Whenever I had it on the blower, it was really stiff to pull over. Nothing to do with the valve. Spark plug was out. You could hear like a squeaking sound down in the cylinder. I put oil in it. It didn't even make a difference at all. So I'm just gonna tear it open now and see what's what. It's also got a bad leak somewhere, probably one of the crank seals or some of the Durco sealant. Valve cover was leaking too. But oddly enough, it looks like this machine was serviced, because whenever I opened it up, the two coil wires were not put back on. Brand new spark plug and the valves were perfectly adjusted, which is quite rare for these machines, to say the least. And I don't know if this was me. I think it might have been me, but the flywheel key was sheared off. Here's the spark plug. Brand new. Never been ran at all. So I'm going to pull this open and we'll see what's what. Here's also the case the engine was in. This would have been the back side. Oil everywhere. And this is the blower, the fan side. You can see even oil in there splattered around over the fan. It's making like a streak kind of thing. Here's all the rest of the parts scattered around. That's the one thing that sucks about a Stihl blower. To take out the short block, you should take literally every single screw out of the machine. Everything. One other thing, this blower, it's an older blower. It's the date 2010, so it's 12 years old and probably not really worth putting too much money into. The handle itself is in pretty good shape. The blower tube is actually not completely destroyed at all, which is surprising, because normally those commercial guys grind them down on the ground pretty hard. So I'm going to take the coil off, see if these are T25. Looks like there's little spacers that go behind the engine for the coil. Here's one, and here's the other one. Take note of that. Yeah, you can see even around the valves, this gasket's been leaking. You can see it's all oily there. But the valves were perfectly adjusted, like I said. Let's take off the cam wheel door, the little back cover. Sorry about the shaky camera angle. I'm just holding my phone right with my hand. I'm just going to readjust the camera and I'll be right back to pop off the cover. Alright, I'm going to pop off the cam wheel door. The sealant that Stihl uses, it's an RTV sealant, but they use a brand called Durco, D-I-R-K-O. And its stuff is pretty... I don't think this was probably leaking. It's possible though. I don't have a leak down tester to check it. Let's check if the back cam pin's wallowed out, as the Mower Medic 1 always says. Very slightly. It's not too bad, not horrible. Oops. Let's see here. We got the cam gear, little lifters, and the cam gear, it's not melted down at all. I tend to have a feeling that on the blowers, the cam gear doesn't get melted down as bad as on the trimmers, because a blower's always under constant load. You aren't bogging down the engine per se. If you give it a trimmer too little gas, then it's always bogging down, and that is what creates a lot of heat. A blower, it's a set piece of equipment because it always has the same amount of load on it. So I guess next I'm just going to take off these two 8mm nuts, take off the rocker arms, and I will pull out the push rods, take off the lifters, and pop out that cam wheel. So I'm just going to pop off these 8mm nuts. And let it be said, this is my first time doing a teardown on one of these little Formix engines, so feel free to let me know what I did wrong in the comments. I do want to get the push rods completely out. That's why I'm taking it apart. So I wanted just to get the cam wheel out. You can just loosen these, and it will loosen up the tension on the and these nuts are kind of stiff because they kind of have an yeah, the top is triangular shape. It's so they don't vibrate loose, and so you don't have to have a dual nut because these are so small. Like on a bigger lawnmower 4-cycle engine, you have the dual nut act as a jam nut. These studs are so small, they would probably be worried that people would crank down on a dual nut so much they would snap the little stud completely right off. Just pull the lifters off, and the little, where was this piece? Oh, right here in the top. Before I do that, I don't know if these are different at all, but this is the intake side. So I'll put a little eye right here on the top for intake, and a little E on this one for exhaust. They're marked. I'll pull them off. Intake and exhaust. And out comes the push rods. Yeah, the push rods are the exact same length. So now in here, we can take off these little, I forget what these are called, like the feelers that ride on the cam wheel. These just pull off, and there's the pin. I'm laying everything out on the bench the way I took everything off. Let's see how the maybe there's the lifters, I guess, on the cam wheel. If that's not wallowed out at all. You can tell I watch Mower Medic 1 quite often. Let's check it on the back plate. Yeah, slightly wallowed out. Not bad at all though, like some of those ones that the Mower Medic 1 has shown. Those have got some horrible slop. Up. First piece of carnage. Little piece of wire. Pull that out right down in there. Pull out the cam gear. Oh, okay. So the decompression has completely shredded itself. That's come completely apart, so there was no decompression release. I don't know if this is supposed to be like this, if there's this big groove. You can see where those little lifter profile is. There's just the slightest little bit of roughage right there. This could be reused, but the decompression fell off, so it can't be. And if you're seeing this, it looks like there's some water in here. There is water in here because that's my fault. I was stupid and I left it outside. You saw where all the other parts were and it poured down rain. I don't think it's a big deal because I'm pretty sure this engine is destroyed anyway. So that's one interesting thing. Cam gear in good shape, decompression fell apart. And I don't know if I did mention, this is from 2010, 12 years old. Next, I just want to pull off what would be the oil sump. Oh yeah, that's right, they use Loctite on these in the factory. I'm probably going to have to hold this in a vise. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm going to gently put the engine in the vise. Pop off that cover. They also use Durco to seal this cover on here as well. Whee! Pull out the other crank seal. Sometimes these can be a little bit tricky to get out because of the Stihl Durco. This one too. Ooh, the edge is literally crispy. It's hard as a rock. No sealing left with that. I'm actually the bearings, they just have that dry sound to them. Oh yeah. Whew. Again, all that water is my fault. Okay. Sorry. Yep, piston is destroyed. Let me wipe it down a bit. One side, the piston, this is how it should look. You can still see where the oil grooves are. Top doesn't even have too much carbon on it. It's pretty clean here. Then we come to this side. Ouch. Hard scoring. Rings are stuck. Let's see how the needle bearing is. Down here, the journal with the needle bearing on the connecting rod and the crankshaft. That's nice and smooth. One thing I'm noticing, one of these timing gears has a big nick in it. I don't know if that's actually a mark used on purpose. Let's examine the cylinder. Let's hope the cylinder is okay because you can get a aftermarket piston for like 30 bucks, but you can't even get an aftermarket cylinder. The cheapest option I have found for rebuilding this is not to rebuild it at all. It's to buy a whole new short block, which I'm pretty sure was OEM Stihl for like $165. But if the cylinder's all right and I can get new crank seals and an aftermarket piston and rings, I think it's going to be good enough here. Let's see. This side completely smooth. Oh yeah. All right, I will show you guys, but this engine is junk. All right, there you go. You can see the scoring. how the other side's perfectly shiny. But there, now you can see it. See how there's those swirl marks until it stops right about there? Or, I can't do this with two hands. It looks like this engine has been honed at one point, because you can see where the piston stops. Yeah, there's no other way that would have been like that. This engine has been honed with one of those drill powered honing rods, probably trying to fix the scoring, but that it's so hard to say. There's a lot of aluminum transfer. If I had a hone, a cylinder hone, I might be able to get that aluminum transfer off. Let's see here. All right, so I looked at these scores a little bit deeper. They look really bad, but if I feel the spots where there's not the aluminum transfer, it's perfectly smooth. I cannot even feel a dimple with my finger at all. I think a lot of that is actually aluminum transfer from the aluminum piston. So I'm gonna price out what a cylinder hone would be and see what's seized up over here on the piston. So this engine would need 2 crankshaft seals, cylinder honed, and it would need a complete new piston and the wrist pin bearing, the needle bearing. I'm pretty sure there's a needle bearing under here, because that will not turn at all. Everything else I think is all right. This is an old blower, guys. These Stihl Formix engines, they usually run pretty good. So they are designed to run on super high compression. So if the compression is just a little bit lower, but if I can get that honed up, I think we're gonna be pretty good, because the rings have quite a bit of expansion gap. All right, I'm gonna price some stuff out, guys, and I'll let you know what I find. Well, I priced out the parts for what I need. The aftermarket piston, I'm going aftermarket with this, guys. Don't complain about that in the comments. Is $24. It comes with the piston, rings, wrist pin, and wrist pin clips. Everything I need. Cylinder hone. The aftermarket pistons from eBay. Cylinder hone, $15 from Amazon. I made sure it fit the hole, or the cylinder. New crankshaft seals. I got a 10-pack, also aftermarket, and the reason I decided to go with that, because they've sold like something like 236 of them, and they're still selling them. If they were absolute garbage, they would have been gone by now. That's the one nice thing about eBay. It lets you know how many of them have been sold, so obviously they're not garbage. That's a 10-pack, because I need seals for another blower. That was, what was, $8.56 for 10 crankshaft seals. The Durco sealant, I am going to use the Durco sealant because that's what Stihl wants, was $12 for the tube. You could probably get away with just normal Walmart RTV stuff, but I'm going to use the red Durco. New flywheel key was like $6.35, which is crazy for the tiniest little sliver of metal. Couldn't find an aftermarket one for that. New valve cover gasket and a little crush washer. It was the whole kit. That's the cheapest way to go. So it's gonna have another feeler gauge. That was $10. And oh yeah, new cam gear. I actually have, whenever I got the blower, the gentleman actually gave me this block. He said the piston and cylinder is seized, or not seized, it's scored. I'm gonna take the cam cover, or cam gear out of here. This engine looks almost brand new. I bet these crank seals can probably be reused on here. I haven't opened this up. I imagine this can be reused. See even what the spark plug's like in here. Yeah, the spark plug's not bad at all. This engine, I think, had almost no hours on it at all. Someone probably straight gassed it. It could have almost been new. The reason why, though, I got the new seals, I'm not going to use these and these, the gasket, because I want this engine to be able to see. Alright, guys. I have everything coming in the mail. In the meantime, I'm going to try to hone the cylinder and see if I can get this aluminum transfer off. I'm not going to film it because I've really never done honing before. Look up a video, there's 100 different videos. I just have just a hone here from Amazon. It was really cheap. But I'm gonna see if I can clean this up and we'll see what happens. Here it is after a few minutes of honing. All the aluminum transfer's gone. And oh wow, I can only feel that score right there in the middle. These ones on the edge, nothing. I'm gonna go for another couple minutes and I think I'll call it good. I don't want to do it too much because I don't want the rings to be too small. That's why I'm not overdoing it, but do it for a little bit longer and I think we should be good. There we go. Cleaned up very nicely. Cannot feel these scratches at all. It's completely smooth. It cleaned up really well for an old blower that otherwise would have been in the garbage. So, better than nothing at all. Alright, now that the cylinder's honed, we have to clean off all the old Durco gasket makers. So I'm just going to put on a time lapse while I do that. It's not hard, but it's tedious work, and it's important to get it all off, else you'll never get a good seal again. So. Alright, I have all the parts cleaned up really nicely where all the old Durco was. I found that tool for the drill in my closet. I forgot I even had that. It's like a really coarse Brillo pad. Does a really nice job. Next I'm just going to clean all the dirt and crap off around the engine. Then I'll check back in with you. Alright guys, I'm working on getting out the wrist pin. I have the circlip off the other side, so I'm going to try to pound it through. This side's really stubborn. Probably use a big... It's starting to come out. There it is. Now a big number 2 Phillips screwdriver is not at all advised. So I probably damaged the wrist pin. And I don't know if I have a new one. No, it's good. Yeah. Here's the piston. all scored up. The cylinder looks new though. I don't know what caused it to score. Straight gas possibly. I don't know. Okay, I have the new piston and parts. 2 new rings. The circlip, wrist pin, and the piston. Take a closer look at it. It's really nice. I mean, I have no hesitation putting this aftermarket piston in. I mean, there's like been like 400 of these sold. So again, if it would have blown up, it would not have been here. And I have the crank assembly in the vise. So I'm going to start putting it together. I also have a little bit of two-stroke oil here, and I'm going to just coat everything with some two-stroke oil. Really any oil. Probably assembly lube is actually better than two-stroke oil. Ooh, whoops. Forgot to put the piston on. My mistake. I'm going to put a little bit of two-stroke oil. You don't have to use your good Stihl two-stroke oil here. This is just the Walmart stuff. And there's a little arrow on the piston. I'm going to point that towards the exhaust side. I don't know if that's the right way it's supposed to go. The way you can tell the exhaust side, because there'll be the cam gear towards the back. So put the arrow. You know what? That doesn't even line up with the exhaust side. So this piston's perfectly symmetrical anyway. Tap the wrist pin, and to get it to go the last little bit, I am just going to use a small little screwdriver and just gently tap it in. This piston's actually nicer than the original piston is because it's going to be a lot easier to ever get the rings off of this piston again. Here's the rings. Let's see if they are the same. Yeah, they're both the same. It doesn't matter which direction they go on. I'm going to put a little bit of two-stroke oil again. The rings are very sharp, so you have to be careful. There's actually a tool you're supposed to use, but no one has that. These can break quite easily, so I'm hoping I get lucky today. Just got to be really careful. I don't want to cut myself on these rings. Sometimes you can just use a little screwdriver. Oop, it's stuck in the first slot, so it has to go down one more. So just carefully.
very careful, like I said, guys, because these snap so easily. Good.
There we go. That one's in. And because this is a 4-cycle engine, there is no little pin to hold the ring in place because there's no worry about an exhaust port or an intake port. So I'm just going to get the second ring in.
Put a little bit of two-stroke oil on it again. It works good to start. You just get one. There we go. Once you get a little section started, I like to put the other side in and just kind of get one in. You have the tool, use the tool. The other one went in easier. Oh. And it's in. We will check the ring gap in the cylinder. I'm not too worried about it at all. I hung the cylinder. I don't even know what the spec is supposed to be for the ring gap. I'm going to put the wrist pin circlips in now.
Well, I got the first wrist pin circlip in. Took about 5 minutes, so I didn't film it. Also, I turned the piston sideways. Now I'm going to do the other side. Basically, you just have to get it in with a pair of pliers into a groove. I'll show you guys the other side once it's done. All right, I got the second one in. This one went in much quicker. I'm going to get the block and we will start assembling everything. All right, I'm going to put 2-stroke oil all around the cylinder because this thing's dry. I completely degreased it since it was honed. The honing is very nice. Put a lot, especially in the top. On these Stihls, it's great to design them so you don't need a piston ring compressor. And I'm going to completely coat the piston. This oil is very important because it takes a good couple minutes before you get enough fuel inside the burnt in the engine for the oil to even deposit. And I am actually going to try to get some oil down in the needle bearing. It's going to be tricky. I might actually just pour a, there we go. I'm going to pour a little bit into these bearings here too. Beautiful. This oil is just so important, guys. Whoa. Good. Yep, so now what I'm going to do, make sure you have your cam gear in the back. And one last time, make sure the rings are I'm glad I checked, the rings were not 180 degrees apart. Rock it back and forth ever so slightly. It's in. I'm going to pull it up. I'm just going to give it a quick rotation. Just to get some of the oil . I want to check. No, there's not going to be any way to check the ring gap. It's good enough. It's not hitting. All right, next is going to be where is it? There we go. Next is going to be to wipe this surface down with alcohol and get the Stihl Durco on. Make sure you didn't get any of that oil on anything. And I'm also going to do the same to the crankcase cover. Next, I'm going to get actually, forgot I had the two-stroke oil out. But first I'm going to wipe down the outer edge of the crankcase, or of the crank seals. Sorry guys, if sometimes I'm not in frame. It's weird looking through keeping stuff in frame whenever you're trying to do it in front of your eyes too. These are not brand new crank seals. I don't have any right now. These are almost brand new ones. They have very low hours on them. Someone straight gassed an engine, I believe. Going to put some two-stroke oil over where the seal's gonna ride. But I'm not going to put the seals in quite yet, because next it's going to be to put down the Durco. This is the high temperature stuff. This stuff actually is made in Germany. I would recommend getting it. It's a $12 tube, and you can use it for other stuff. Why support the Chinese? This is what Stihl uses. It's good enough to rebuild it, so I think the red looks cooler, but this was actually cheaper, the high temperature stuff. You just have to be very careful. And we aren't going to worry about the timing of the engine just yet. We are actually going to do the timing once it's done, because you can easily time these with the flywheel. In the coil, so that's what I like to do. Maybe I will actually set it at top dead center. And if you do happen to get a little bit underneath the bearings, you can, this stuff wipes up with some alcohol. You got to get a little bit where the crank seals are going to go. You want a thin layer, but you don't want it to be so thin because that it's just all that it disappears. I have a pretty good view of where the, you can see right here I got a big glob of Durco right on the bearing. Wipe that off, a little bit over here. Then I like to take the crankcase cover and only put a little bit of Durco right where the seal is going to go. Just use it to basically clean the rust off your finger. Scrape it real good and wipe any last little bit around it. See, it's just enough to get it where the crank seals are going to go. Next, I'm going to take my seal. These have a hard stop, so you know exactly where to stop, which is really nice. You know, I can actually see from the top down that the Durco is getting nicely around it. Perfect. Take our cover. It only goes on one way. This big indent will go over top of the crank gear. Notice these scars in here where the crank gear goes. The teeth have some nicks in them. That's from whenever the decompression release, the ADC, automatic decompression release, flies apart and you keep running it, it jams up the teeth. Bad design by Stihl. Ever so slight tap. Next, we're going to put the crank bolts in. But what I'm going to do, I want to wipe these down with alcohol because these are supposed to have some Loctite on them. And always before I put the Loctite on, what I do, I put the bolts in just like hand tight with a screwdriver, and I let the Durco set for about 15 minutes before I fully tighten them down. Because if we were to tighten this down right now, basically all the Durco would just squeeze out. You need it just to set ever so slightly. So I just... You want to tighten these down just until you see a slight little bit of squish. Wait 15 minutes, take them out, and put Loctite on, torque them down. Speed it up a bit. Hey, I got my valve parts. I'm setting them down, but you guys can't see that. Okay, where here's my cam gear. So on my engine, I took off the rocker arms. So I'm going to put them back on now. Turns out you really don't need to take these off, but what the heck. Make sure you don't lose this little thing in the middle here. It just goes in the middle. $8mm nut. And just tighten it on one turn. It's going to need to be really loose to get the push rods under it. All right, the flywheel's on. It's off at top dead center because I had to spin it to get the nut off, so. Right there. Yeah, this is the best way to do it. Don't listen to what I said before. See how I have the S lined up with the second, or whatever way you look at it. This ground leg, that is top dead center. Turn the engine back over. It's not going to sit too flat now with the flywheel on. You will notice on the cam gear, whoa, the arrow inside the engine. Here's our line. I'm going to grab my pin, put the gear in, the lobe should be pointing up. This is opposite of the weed whackers, the little 4MX engines. On the blowers, the lobe has to be pointing up. This is a mistake that can be easily made, especially if it's your first time doing it, putting the lobe on the bottom. You should figure, oh look, I've seen all the repairs on the weed whacker 4MXs. That's because these cam gears usually never go bad because the engine is always under a constant load. A weed whacker, you can bog it down and heat up your engine. This is always under a constant load. Cam wheel up. Now we're going to start putting in the rocker arms. Alright, now we're going to put the lifters in. Took the coil off and the flywheel. We're still at TDC. You really cannot put these little rocker arm lifter, the valve lifters, in backwards. See how, like this, they're almost perfectly lined up. If I were to put this one at the top, yeah, we got an issue there. So I just put the pin through it. And before I forget, I'm going to put some 2-stroke oil. Just pour it in a little bit. It's going to smoke like crazy, but it's not going to have a wet start at least. Sorry guys, that was blurry. I just realized that. Whoops. Next, push rods. These are always a pain in the butt because the hole is not machined for them. Coming through the top, I do one at a time. There's a little dimple that it sits in the little lifter arm. I pick it up. That way it doesn't come out. Then I just get the rocker arm in place. There's a little dimple on the rocker arm. It makes sure the 2 little guides are on the valve stem. And I will just tighten this down. It's easiest just to do one at a time. That way it doesn't fall off. Still has a little bit of wigglement. How do you like that one? Wigglement. Take the intake side push rod again. I like to lay it down into the top. Just grab these little pair of pliers here. Guide it up into its dimple on. If you guys let me know in the comments what these are called, lifters maybe? Cam riders, I always forget what they're called. Then we'll just line up the dimple. Put the push rod in the dimple on the rocker arm. There it goes. Then you have to make sure it's on the valve. It can be off like this. My dimple's in, but you'll tighten it down. Then you'll have to loosen it all the way back up to get it on the valve stem, and then you'll lose your push rod off the lifter in the back. Tighten it down. I tighten it down. You don't want to crunch it down because you just want it to be a little bit wiggly, like you're doing a valve adjustment. Now we're going to Durco it. So again, wipe it down with alcohol. Especially down here, there's two-stroke oil. Actually, all over it, there's two-stroke oil. And here's my cam cover. And I already checked, probably in a previous clip, this is not wallowed out at all, as MM1 would say. And I'm just going to put a quick drop of oil right in the cover. Careful not to get any on the outside. Where did my rag go? Again, I always like to put Durco on the bigger part than the little part. Here is my Durco. Pretty sure they have a how it's made on these Stihl engines, and they have a machine that does this. It's really cool to watch the machine apply the Durco. It's super smooth. It doesn't get anywhere it doesn't need to be, like I always end up doing, getting it everywhere. Then always, if I have a little bit left over on my finger, scrape it off. Don't let any of it go to waste. Then I'll just pop the cover on. You don't really need to give it a little tap, but again, I'm going to start the screws by hand. And this cover especially, you really need to let it wait for the 15 minutes because it's so flat, it will all squeeze out. These screws are really a bugger. They always want to start stripping. Come on. That's odd. There we go. There we go. I'm pretty sure this was the blower I said that looked like it had been worked on. I can't remember, guys, because I've been working on 3 of these at the same time. You see it all edited down into one clip. I see them all as the same. I have all the parts separated, but still I forget. Be back in 15 minutes to torque those down. Here we are, back where we started. One complete assembled short block, ready for service again. Unfortunately, there's really no way to check for compressions on the engine. Actually, no. I was gonna say you could try to spin it over with a drill because these decompression release, where you lose a lot of compression. It's probably possible to spin it over on the fan side with a compression tester while it's off the blower, but it's really not worth it. Thanks again for watching, guys. Me play around with this Stihl Formix, diagnose the problem, and fix it. It's all ready to go. Back on a BR-600. Now the engine will be able to freely spin again. I'll probably put a little clip in right at the end of it running once it's all back together. Thanks, guys. Alright, the Durco has time to cure. This is not going to be the first time I've started it up since it's been sealed. I've already had it running yesterday to get the carburetor tuned in and everything. Also, I needed to rebuild the carburetor too because it wasn't running right, so I did that. So it's a cold start now. So, let's see how it goes. These things need a lot of priming because the fuel lines are so long to suck up the gas. Choke, the semi-automatic choke's working nicely. Yep, it's running nicely. I'm going to turn out the high screw slightly just to get a little bit more fuel. It was bogging down slightly, so let's do that and I'll be right back. Well, there it is. The engine's completely rebuilt and ready to go. Alright guys, thanks for watching this rather long video, but hopefully that helps some, getting a little bit of insight into these Stihl Formix leaf blowers. There's not a ton of videos out there on YouTube that are actually about rebuilding these, because most of the time people just go right with OEM, which is just always so expensive. So thanks again guys, and peace.